The thrones of Europe have seen some pretty colorful monarchs throughout the ages. Some were famous for their revolutionary reigns, others for their scandalous love lives, and some even have cocktails named after them. However, there were turbulent times when the thrones were occupied by not-so-sane rulers. From trying to live their lives like in a fairy tale, similar to Cinderella, to believing they were made out of glass and might shatter, these monarchs' reigns remain legacies of what might happen when power and madness collide. Today, we're taking off our restraint jackets and walking you through some of Europe's most mad monarchs here at History Galleries. And don't forget to subscribe to support us in our quest for sanity.
Thank you. I'm fine.
Christian VII of Denmark, who ruled between 1766 and 1808, became king just shy of his 17th birthday, following the death of his father, Frederick V. For much of his reign, however, Christian was king only in name. His mental illness deeply influenced his ability to rule and shaped Denmark's political landscape. From the very beginning, it was evident that Christian's mental state was fragile. He displayed erratic behavior, wild mood swings, and disturbing tendencies like paranoia, hallucinations, and self-harm. One of his more notable compulsions was his obsession with masturbation, which worried his court physicians.
I did it all by myself, with this hand right here!
Christian was also prone to violent outbursts and delusions, running through the palace in fits of irrationality, tearing at his clothes, and displaying inappropriate behavior in public, further alarming his advisors. Despite his mental health struggles, Christian managed to marry Princess Caroline Matilda of Great Britain in 1766. However, the marriage was far from happy. Christian showed little interest in his wife and quickly fell into a lifestyle marked by sexual promiscuity and excesses. He formed a relationship with a courtesan, Stevlet Catherine, just 1 year after his marriage, distancing himself even further from Caroline Matilda. The king's mental state worsened, and he became increasingly detached from his responsibilities as monarch. In the late 1760s, Christian's physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee, rose to prominence within the Danish court. Struensee quickly became the de facto ruler of Denmark, taking advantage of Christian's deteriorating condition. He introduced sweeping reforms inspired by Enlightenment ideals, including changes to education, social welfare, and governance, all of which were signed into law by Christian VII. Struensee's influence over the king was immense, but it also drew the ire of the Danish nobility, who viewed him as an opportunistic outsider taking control of the kingdom. The relationship between Christian, Struensee, and Caroline Matilda became even more complicated when the queen began an affair with Struensee. This further incensed the Danish court, and in 1772, a coup led by Christian's stepmother, Queen Dowager Juliane Marie, resulted in Struensee's arrest and execution. Christian, whose mental state left him vulnerable to manipulation, was coerced into signing Struensee's death warrant, effectively severing his last link to any form of governance. Shortly after, Christian divorced Caroline Matilda, who was exiled, leaving behind their 2 children, making this story much more intense than a South American soap opera. After Struensee's fall from power, Christian's reign became largely symbolic. From 1772 onwards, his stepmother, half-brother Frederick, and the politician Ove Goldberg ruled the country. By 1784, his son Frederick VI assumed the role of Prince Regent, taking over all practical aspects of governance, while Christian, by then almost completely incapacitated by his mental illness, remained king in name only. Christian VII died on March 13, 1808, at the age of 59, suffering a stroke after spending his final years in near-total isolation. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, ruled from 1547 to 1584 and became the first Tsar of Russia. His reign marked a significant turning point in Russian history, characterized by both impressive achievements and terrifying brutality. Ivan's early life was turbulent. Orphaned at 3, he was subjected to power struggles among the boyars, Russian nobility, which deeply affected him. Isolated and neglected, he developed a deep mistrust of the nobility. Ascending to the throne at just 16, Ivan quickly moved to consolidate his power. In 1547, he officially adopted the title of Tsar, emphasizing his absolute authority over Russia. Under Ivan's rule, Russia expanded significantly. He conquered Kazan, Astrakhan, and Siberia, laying the foundations for the future Russian Empire. His reign saw administrative and military reforms that centralized the government, while he also established Russia's first parliament and oversaw the construction of St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. However, his successes were eventually overshadowed by his growing paranoia and cruelty. Ivan's descent into madness began after the death of his first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, in 1560. Convinced that she had been poisoned, he became increasingly paranoid and suspicious of everyone around him, especially the nobility. His mental state deteriorated further, leading him to establish the Oprichnina, a secret police force loyal only to him. The Oprichniki terrorized the Russian population, carrying out mass executions, imprisonments, and widespread repression against anyone Ivan suspected of treason. In one notable incident, Ivan ordered the Oprichniki to invade and destroy the city of Novgorod, fearing its people would defect to Lithuania. Thousands were killed, crippling the city permanently. As his paranoia deepened, Ivan became prone to violent outbursts. He accused many of his close advisors and nobles of treason, leading to their executions or exile. His mental instability culminated in one of the most infamous episodes of his life in 1581. The Tsar had assaulted his pregnant daughter-in-law, who he felt was wearing unconventionally light clothing. When the younger Ivan rushed in and confronted his father, the elder struck him on the head with his scepter, and he died on November 19th. This tragic act left him devastated, and with his son's death, his weak and incompetent second son, Feodor, inherited the throne. Ivan the Terrible died from a stroke on March 18, 1584, while playing chess with one of his advisors, Bogdan Belsky, marking the end of his infamous reign. Charles VI of France, also known as Charles the Mad, was born on December 3, 1368, and ruled from 1380 to 1422. His reign was marked by the 100 Years' War, internal conflicts, and a long struggle with mental illness that earned him the moniker the Mad. Though he was initially called Charles the Beloved due to early successes, his later years were defined by bouts of psychosis that severely affected his leadership and the stability of France. Charles ascended the throne at just 11, following the death of his father, Charles V, and was placed under the regency of his uncles, including Philip the Bold of Burgundy. For a time, his advisors, known as the Marmosets, helped him steer the kingdom effectively. However, in 1392, Charles experienced his first major psychotic episode. While leading a military expedition, he attacked his own knights in a delusional fit, believing he was being betrayed. From then on, Charles' mental health would deteriorate in cycles of madness and lucidity, often rendering him incapable of ruling. His condition worsened to the point where he believed he was made of glass and could shatter if touched. To protect himself, he had iron rods sewn into his clothing. He also had the entrances of the Hotel Saint-Paul walled up to prevent him from running wildly through the corridors during his episodes. Probably not the most comfortable attire, but given the trends that occurred over the years, this one was no biggie. At times, he forgot who he was entirely, wandering the palace in confusion, even failing to recognize his wife and children. As his mental state became more unstable, his wife, Queen Isabeau, assumed a greater role in governing, along with his uncles. This led to a power struggle among France's nobility, with factions vying for control of the kingdom. The infighting weakened the monarchy and exacerbated the ongoing conflicts of the 100 Years' War. In 1415, the French suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of the English at the Battle of Agincourt, further compounding Charles's inability to lead. In 1420, he signed the Treaty of Troyes, which disinherited his son, the Dauphin, and named Henry V of England as his heir. The treaty also stipulated that Charles's daughter, Catherine, marry Henry, further intertwining the French and English royal families. Guessing he cracked under pressure. Get it? Because of the being made out of glass phobia. No? Tough crowd. Charles VI died on October 21, 1422, at the Hotel Saint-Paul in Paris. His death occurred just weeks after the death of Henry V, leaving the infant Henry VI of England as both the King of England and, by the terms of the Treaty of Troyes, the King of France. However, the Dauphin, who later became Charles VII, was crowned in Reims and continued to fight for the throne, leading to the eventual victory of the House of Valois in the 100 Years' War. You may not be familiar with King Ludwig II of Bavaria, but you most definitely know his castle, Neuschwanstein. This iconic fairy tale-like structure in the Bavarian Alps symbolizes Ludwig's dreams brought to life. He became king in 1864 at just 18 years old, focusing more on his love for the arts and fantasy than on governing. He was also called the Swan King or the Fairy Tale King. In 1867, Ludwig became engaged to Duchess Sophie Charlotte, but postponed the wedding before ultimately canceling it. He never married, and his writings indicate he struggled with his homosexuality, which he sought to reconcile with his Catholic faith. Ludwig displayed increasingly eccentric behavior throughout his reign, distancing himself from state affairs and immersing himself in grandiose projects and nocturnal habits. He often took nighttime sleigh rides through the Bavarian Alps, preferring the silence and isolation of the night. But honestly, I would like to see Queen Liz taking a stroll on her custom-made sledge. His obsession with the mystical is also reflected in the fantastical architecture of his castles, Neuschwanstein and Linderhof, which were inspired by medieval legends and the operas of Richard Wagner. Although rumors of his involvement in the occult persisted, there is little evidence beyond his fascination with the fantastical. By 1885, Ludwig had amassed a debt of 14 million marks due to his extravagant projects, leading his ministers to question his mental fitness. Despite not using state funds for his personal endeavors, his financial irresponsibility threatened Bavaria. His ministers, led by Count Maximilian von Hohenstein, compiled a medical report accusing Ludwig of mental instability. The report cited bizarre behaviors such as pathological shyness, avoiding public appearances, dining outdoors in winter, sending servants on costly and unnecessary missions, and making violent threats. Although signed by psychiatrists, most had never personally examined him, and the validity of their diagnosis was later questioned. In June 1886, Ludwig was declared unfit to rule, with claims of paranoia and madness, though modern experts believe he may have had schizotypal personality disorder, possibly compounded by Pick's disease. His deposition led to his tragic end just days later. On June 13, 1886, Ludwig and his physician, Dr. Bernhard von Guden, went for a walk near Lake Starnberg. When they failed to return, a search party found their bodies in shallow water. Ludwig's watch had stopped at 6:54 p.m., offering an eerie timestamp for the mysterious circumstances of his death. While his death was ruled a suicide by drowning, no water was found in his lungs, and his death remains shrouded in mystery, with theories ranging from heart failure to an escape attempt gone wrong. George III reigned as King of Great Britain and Ireland from 1760 until his death in 1820, a reign that witnessed significant historical events such as the American Revolutionary War, the Napoleonic Wars, and the unification of Great Britain and Ireland in 1801. George was known for his faithfulness to his wife, Queen Charlotte. Unlike these other guys, as a monarch of the House of Hanover, George was the first of his line to be born in Britain and speak English as his first language. Despite early efforts to solidify British interests globally, his reign is perhaps most remembered for his later struggles with mental illness. George III's mental health began to deteriorate noticeably in 1788 when he experienced his first major episode of illness. His behavior became erratic, including fits of rage, paranoia, and nonsensical speech. At times, he would speak for hours on end without pausing, and his vocabulary became increasingly disjointed and incoherent. He was prone to delusions, at one point believing that he was being poisoned. In another bizarre incident, it was reported that he attempted to shake hands with a tree, mistaking it for the King of Prussia. These episodes disrupted his ability to govern and created a leadership crisis, as the king was often incapacitated for extended periods. Though his illness was long attributed to porphyria, a hereditary metabolic disorder, modern research suggests that he may have suffered from bipolar disorder, a diagnosis that better fits the erratic mood swings and other symptoms he displayed. Despite periods of recovery, George's mental health continued to deteriorate over the years. In 1810, following the death of his youngest and favorite daughter, Princess Amelia, George suffered a final and devastating relapse. His condition became permanent, and he was no longer able to perform any of his royal duties. In response, Parliament passed the Regency Act of 1811, officially naming his eldest son as Prince Regent, a position he would hold until George III's death, effectively governing the country while the king lived in seclusion. In addition to his mental illness, George III also suffered from declining physical health. By the later years of his life, he was nearly deaf, endured chronic pain from rheumatism, and had gone completely blind. Remember the previous guy with the obsessive bishop beating? That's what happens. We're joking. This is perfectly healthy and fine, unless you do it behind a park bench in the middle of the day. Yikes. He spent his final years at Windsor Castle, where he lived in isolation, unaware of many of the events occurring around him. He did not know, for example, that he had been declared King of Hanover in 1814, or that his wife, Queen Charlotte, had passed away in 1818. George III died at the age of 81 in January 1820 after battling pneumonia, having navigated an era of great change in British history. So, after hearing about these rulers, who do you think wins the title of history's most eccentric monarch? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to History Galleries, where we uncover the craziest chapters of the past, one mad king at a time.